So Chapter 4, Key Issue 1, is going to go over pop culture. We're going to compare the origin, diffusion, and distribution of folk and pop culture in the world. We're going to look at the characteristics of folk and pop culture, and it describes how sports have been transformed from folk to pop culture. So where do you find folk and popular leisure activities distributed? Geographers study how culture influences behavior. And so as we're looking at human behavior, we want to look at the differences between something that's a habit and something that's a custom. So a habit's a repetitive act performed by an individual. So what you choose to wear, what days you choose to wear it, what time you wake up, what you do in the morning, like do you check your phone first? What do you do? That's the first thing you do in the morning. These are your habits. A custom is a repetitive act performed by a group. And so I would predict that a custom among most people in the United States now is that they check their phones. It's one of the first things they do when they wake up. So that would be a custom. So you might have a habit that fits the customs of your social group. But a custom is something that just you do, or it's a pattern that you repeat. And a habit is an act that you repeat, and a custom is a repetitive act that you are sharing with a larger cultural group. What are some characteristics of folk and popular culture? The origin of folk culture is usually anonymous. It might have multiple HuGs, each one originating independently. You learn about it from anonymous sources. You don't know the exact date it is established. You don't know the people who maybe originated, where it originated, or who spread it originally. Where popular culture is a product of developed countries, usually North American or European, and you can trace its origin to a specific person or corporation. So you know where popular culture comes from. How do they diffuse? Popular culture is diffused by hierarchical diffusion. So it goes from these HuGs or nodes of innovation, and it's spread with the help of modern communications. And once it spreads from its initial nodes, then it might spread through contagious diffusion as well, but it's hierarchical to begin with. So it'll start in like a television show will diffuse first from the large urban areas where it's made, and then it'll diffuse through the large networks in the United States, and then maybe it'll be syndicated globally. Folk culture is smaller, so there's less people practicing it. It's in a smaller area or a large scale map, right? And it's going to spread more slowly, primarily through relocation, diffusion, or migration. Folk culture is distributed in smaller, isolated pockets. And it's a combination of local, physical, and cultural factors that will influence its distinctive distributions. So, for example, in your book, it talks about the different folk cultures around the Himalayan mountains. So the physical barriers, the Himalayan mountains, would have prevented a large amount of migration. So these little pockets would have formed. And then things like different religions make almost cultural barriers, so people won't really cross those cultural barriers to share their folk culture. Popular culture is widely distributed and primarily through electronic media, so things like physical barriers don't often matter. I mean, I guess they could matter in the fact that there are places that don't have access to like high-speed internet, and it's harder to get electricity and television lines in because of the physical geography. But in general, we can spread. A TV show can spread, straight across the Rocky Mountains here. The mountains aren't a barrier to the spread of popular culture. The principal access to not getting access to popular culture is you don't have enough money to purchase the materials, or you don't have enough money in a region or a country to establish the infrastructure to have access to the internet or TV that's spreading it. And sometimes things like our sports can move from a folk sport to an aspect of our popular culture. So this map shows you the World Cup qualifiers. Um, Folk music originates anonymously. It's transmitted orally. So you can modify songs over generations to have these different changes. But in general, like, how do you learn about folk music? Like, you would have heard someone singing it. Like, maybe your mom sang it to you when you're a kid, or your grandma. So you learn the songs and you pass them on. Most folk songs, they're more like stories, really. They tell some kind of tale or story. So the story might be related to a life cycle event, like a birth or a marriage or a death, or the rituals associated with these. It might send a lesson about agriculture. So there are folk songs that within it are really like instructions for how to farm the land, or how to, harvest something from the forest, or about hunting. And these songs are either passed down to your children, or when you move, when you migrate, these folk songs go with you. Pop music is written by individuals with the intent of being sold and with the intent of being performed in front of a paying audience. Popular music requires a high degree of technical skill, usually. And this isn't saying that folk music doesn't have technical skill. Like, there are, very talented folk music singers. You could play, a guitar or a traditional instrument with incredible beauty and precision and be playing folk music. But pop music usually involves some kind of training. And you also have strong connections with similar musicians that span the globe. And so your pop music style, so if you were classified as like R&B or hip hop, or just, in general, like pop, like dance music, like, or country music, like, you can identify that style across different nations' borders, across languages. And so you could identify a hip hop song even if you don't know the words, because it's in a different language. The style has a certain integrity, like, has defining characteristics. And so pop music styles cross borders. So most sports were once, little isolated folk customs, and as they grew in popularity, they were originally spread through relocation diffusion, and that could have led to them usually being spread after that through expansive diffusion. So sports would have been first relocation diffusion, just like most folk culture, and then maybe hierarchical diffusion within an area after that, and sometimes stimulus diffusion because you want to change the sport. So we're going to use the example of what most of the world calls football, but we call soccer. This sport originated in England in the 11th century. It used to be called like kick the Dane's head, and it was a really violent, like mob kind of sport. And so it was banned for a long time in England. So like soccer was illegal to play at one point. And then in the 1800s, they started to organize soccer clubs in the United Kingdom. And it wasn't long after that, once they had these soccer clubs, that they started to pay people to play. And this led to, once you're paying people and you have a class of professional football or soccer players, then you have to have organized rules, and then you start to make like professional leagues. And so you get this formal transition from a folk sport to a popular sport. One that can be shared easily. It's got rules. You can teach people. You could give them guidebooks. And as England was, exercising its imperial powers across the world, soccer came along with it. So every time England established, or the United Kingdom, which is what it's called now, but so Great Britain or England, every time they established a colony, they would have brought their love of soccer with them. And so it would have diffused. So like people in India would have learned about playing soccer because of the colonial presence of Great Britain in India. And so eventually soccer just started to spread in that hierarchical fashion through the rest of the world. So then it became expansion diffusion. And that also, moving from relocation diffusion to a method of expansion diffusion, can also mark a change from a folk culture to a popular culture practice. And then with television, soccer really just globally took off. And so now it's a widely played global sport. We looked at the map originally of the World Cup qualifiers. People play soccer all over. So sports go from folk to pop culture. And one step we can measure the movement from a folk sport to a popular culture sport would be to look at the Olympics. So in order for something to be qualified as an Olympic sport, you have to play it in 75 countries. So if the sport's widely played in 75 countries, then it becomes an Olympic sport. And so you can kind of trace like the modern transformation of these sports by saying like, oh, look, like now it's an Olympic sport. I think that's pretty cool. Some other folk sports that are gaining popularity are things like cricket in the UK and former colonies. Baseball made an epic rise, right, from folk sport to really a pop culture. American football is making the same rise. And wushu, which is a martial arts. So technically these things are classified as folk sports still because they aren't global, like not everyone in the world plays them. They wouldn't be played at the Olympics, but I think that globally things like baseball are considered folk sports, but there's a lot of pop culture associated with baseball in the United States. So, but we can trace a transition as more and more countries play baseball. Like you might be able to see the transition of baseball moving from what's classified as a folk sport to a popular culture sport in your lifetime.